There is a strange paradox in the journey of healing. The more inwardly mature people become, the less often they realize how much they have changed. They still see the wounds that remain, the days when old emotions return, the moments when they still feel weak. And so they believe they are still stuck at the starting point. But what they do not realize is that healing is rarely measured by the disappearance of pain. It is measured by the moment pain no longer has the power to decide who they are, as it once did. This is also what Carl Jung always emphasized. Healing is not about eliminating the darkness, but about bringing it into consciousness. When the fears, wounds, and rejected parts no longer silently control a person's thoughts, emotions, and choices, a very deep transformation has already taken place. Shadow still exists, persona still exists, but they no longer hold the power to direct life. Instead, a person begins to respond more calmly, let go more gently, and live closer to their true self. These changes may seem very small, but they are the clearest evidence that healing is quietly unfolding. In this video, we will explore 7 signs that show you have healed more than you may realize. Not through positive affirmations or an outward appearance of strength, but through the subtle changes in the way you respond, the way you love, the way you face yourself, and the way you meet the world. Stay until the end of the video, because the final sign may help you realize that healing was never the journey of becoming a more perfect version of yourself, but rather the journey of returning to who you truly are. Sign 1. You no longer react to every wound. Number 1. What has truly changed within you? There were reactions that once felt so familiar that you thought they were simply who you were. If someone stayed silent longer than usual, anxiety would begin to rise in your heart. If someone gave you a small piece of criticism, you could spend the whole day blaming yourself. If you were rejected, you immediately began to doubt your own value. Everything happened so quickly that there was almost no space for choice. Emotion appeared, and reaction followed right after. And for many years, you believed this was simply your personality. But then, at some point, the same situation appears again. Other people still behave as they did before. Life still brings things that do not go your way. The past has not completely disappeared. The only difference is you. You still feel sad, you still feel disappointed, but you no longer rush to conclude. You no longer immediately think that you have been abandoned, looked down upon, or that you are not good enough. Instead, you pause for a little longer. And sometimes, even that brief pause is enough to change the entire outcome. This is what many people do not realize. They keep waiting for a great transformation to believe that they have healed. They think there will come a day when they no longer hurt, no longer feel wounded, no longer get shaken by anything. But healing rarely happens in such a loud and obvious way. It often appears in very small moments, so small that if you do not look back, you may easily overlook them. Perhaps in the past, whenever conflict arose, you always wanted to explain everything until the other person understood you. Now, you realize that not every misunderstanding needs to be resolved immediately. In the past, if someone became distant, you would do everything you could to keep them beside you. Now, you may still feel sad, but you no longer lose yourself in exchange for someone else's presence. In the past, you could spend hours thinking about one careless sentence. Now, you know that not every word deserves a permanent place in your heart. At first glance, these may seem like very small changes, but from Carl Jung's perspective, it is precisely these changes that reflect a real transformation in the inner world. People do not mature simply because time passes. They mature when the way they respond to life begins to change. An old situation, but a new response, that is always a sign that something within has quietly shifted. What matters is that this change does not make you cold or numb. You still know sadness, you still know disappointment. There are still moments when tears fall because of an old memory. Healing has never meant that the heart stops feeling. On the contrary, you feel everything more clearly than before. The only difference is that emotions no longer pull you in whatever direction they want. You begin to become the observer of your emotions instead of becoming their prisoner. This process is like a person steering a boat in the middle of the sea. In the past, every large wave could push the boat off course. You lived according to each gust of wind, each surge of water, without knowing where you would drift. But with more experience, the sea still rises as before. The wind still changes direction as before. What has changed is the pair of hands holding the wheel. The person steering cannot command the sea to become still, but they know how not to let every wave decide their direction. Healing works in the same way. It does not promise a life without storms. It only helps you stop turning every storm into destiny. There is a very clear sign in people who have healed more than they realize. They no longer spend so much energy reacting to everything that happens. Not because they are indifferent, but because they have learned to distinguish between what is worth holding and what should be released. They no longer turn one mistake into proof that they are a failure. They no longer turn one rejection into the conclusion that they are unworthy of love. They no longer turn one bad day into a prediction that their entire life will become the same. That is when you begin to recognize a very important truth. What is changing is not the outside world. Other people may still be careless. Life may still contain loss. Unwanted things will still happen, but you no longer give them the right to decide how you will feel about yourself. That power is slowly returning to where it has always belonged. Perhaps the first sign of healing is not a bigger smile or an easier life. It is simply the moment you realize that you no longer react like the person you were yesterday. And sometimes, those quiet changes are the clearest proof that something inside you has truly grown. Number 2, why does the wound no longer control you? And when we look more closely at that tiny pause, we begin to realize that the most important change is not in the reaction itself, but in the fact that the wound within no longer holds the same power it once did. A person who no longer reacts to every emotional trigger is not someone whose heart has grown cold. They have simply stopped allowing an old wound to step in and explain the whole of the present on their behalf. Wounds rarely control us through loud voices. They do so through rapid, hidden interpretations that arise almost before we notice them. Someone becomes quiet, and the mind immediately concludes, "They are pulling away from me." Someone offers feedback, and an inner voice instantly whispers, "I'm not good enough." Someone chooses someone else, and the old wound turns it into proof that I am unworthy of love. The event itself may be small, but once it passes through an unhealed part of the psyche, it becomes magnified into a verdict. I know a woman named Emily Carter. She was not the type to appear fragile or complain often. On the outside, Emily was kind, considerate, and always tried to keep the peace. But deep inside, she carried an intense fear of silence. Whenever her boyfriend replied to her messages later than usual, her whole body shifted into a state of alarm. She reread every message she had sent. She wondered whether she had done something wrong. She tried to interpret his attitude through every period, every pause, every minute of waiting. What hurt Emily was not simply her boyfriend's silence. What hurt her was the meaning her old wound assigned to that silence. To someone else, it might have been nothing more than a busy day, but to her, it felt like a door quietly closing in her face. In Emily's unconscious, silence was never just silence. It meant being abandoned, being replaced, being forgotten. So whenever the present touched that familiar signal, the past awakened and began speaking for her once again. Jung said, "There can be no transforming of darkness into light and of apathy into movement without emotion. The darkness within us is not transformed by forcing ourselves to forget, nor is it healed by pretending everything is fine. It requires emotion, because emotion is where our wounds leave their deepest living traces. Only when we are willing to feel what once frightened us, to remain with anxiety, shame, anger, or sorrow, without immediately running away, does that darkness begin to emerge from the unconscious." One day, the familiar situation happened again. Her boyfriend did not reply to her messages for several hours. The old feelings immediately resurfaced. Her heart raced. Her stomach tightened. A part of her wanted to send another message, to ask what was wrong, to seek reassurance so the anxiety would subside. But this time, instead of following her old automatic reaction, she put her phone down. She sat quietly for a few minutes. She did not pretend to be fine. She did not criticize herself for being too sensitive. She simply allowed the feeling to exist. That single moment changed everything. For the first time, her fear was allowed to be felt without turning into action. Her anxiety was acknowledged without immediately seeking comfort from her boyfriend. Her pain was recognized without becoming an accusation. Between the wound and the response, there was finally enough space for consciousness to enter. And once consciousness appeared, the old reaction no longer had the power to pull her entire being back into the same familiar cycle. A wound loses its control over us when we begin to separate two things: the emotion we are experiencing and the reality that is actually unfolding. Emotions can feel completely real in the body. They can make the chest feel heavy, the throat tighten, the hands tremble, and the heart beat faster. But emotions are not always the final truth. The fear of being abandoned may still live within us, but that does not mean our partner is abandoning us. A feeling of not being good enough may arise, but that does not mean our worth has truly disappeared. Imagine the wound as an old translator living inside the mind. For years, that translator has interpreted every event through the same language of fear. Silence becomes abandonment. Rejection becomes worthlessness. Feedback becomes rejection. But healing begins when we start questioning those translations. We no longer accept the very first subtitle that appears in our minds. We learn to ask ourselves, is this really what this situation means? Or is this simply the way my old wound is translating the present? So when an old wound is touched and the familiar reaction no longer rises immediately, that is not a small thing. It is evidence that consciousness has begun to grow stronger than the old pattern. We still feel, but we are no longer swept away by the same emotional loop. And perhaps this is the deepest reason our wounds no longer hold power over us. They have finally been seen clearly enough that they no longer need to speak on our behalf. Number 3. When calm becomes your new strength. When the wound has been seen clearly enough, a very different kind of strength begins to appear. It is not loud, it does not need to prove itself, and it does not try to appear untouchable. It simply appears in the moment when you can remain still before something that once threw you into chaos. The same words, the same silence, the same situation that once made you react intensely, but this time you no longer rush into defense. You feel everything moving inside, but on the outside, you can still hold a slower breath. This is not a weakness. It is not a resignation either. Calm after healing is not the kind of silence that comes from fear. It is the silence of a person who has begun to understand themselves. In the past, you reacted quickly because there were too many things inside that had not yet been named. A sentence touched shame, a distant attitude touched the fear of abandonment, a criticism touched the feeling of not being good enough. But when those painful places have been seen by consciousness, you no longer need a strong reaction to protect the part of you that is still trembling in the dark. From Jung's perspective, this is a very deep movement of the soul. When the unconscious is still leading, people think they are choosing, but in truth, they are being pulled by old patterns. When consciousness begins to be present, a person no longer lives only as a reflex of pain. They can recognize anger without being possessed by anger, recognize fear without immediately acting from fear, recognize the feeling of being hurt without turning it into accusation or self-humiliation. That is when calm is no longer just an outer appearance, but proof of inner self-mastery. Imagine this calm as an anchor dropped to the bottom of the sea. On the surface, waves can still rise. The wind can still blow hard. The boat can still shake, but it is no longer swept away without direction, because beneath it, there is now a point of holding. A healed person is the same. Emotions still come, but they no longer drag the whole life along with them. A bad day can still make the heart heavy, but it no longer has enough power to make you forget who you are. Someone disappointing you can still make you sad, but it no longer turns you into someone begging to be loved. The practice of calm begins very little. The next time something touches an old wound, do not rush to answer immediately. Do not rush to explain. Do not rush to send another message just to be reassured. Pause for a few breaths. Feel where the body is reacting. Is the chest heavy? Is the throat tight? Is the stomach clenched? Then say to yourself slowly, I am being touched by something old, but I do not need to react in the old way. A single sentence like that can create a small opening between emotion and action. In that opening, you begin to take back the power to choose. You can choose to stay silent for a little longer. Choose to respond after you have become calmer. Choose to step away from an unnecessary argument. Choose not to turn your pain into a weapon that hurts someone else. And each time you are able to choose this way, you are not only avoiding an old reaction, you are rebuilding trust with yourself. Calm becomes a new strength when it is no longer a shell on the outside, but the result of an inner world that is less easily pulled by darkness that has not yet been seen. Other people may not recognize the change right away. They may only see that you explain less, panic less, need to control less. But inside, that is a great transformation. Because for the first time, you no longer allow every wound to decide your voice, your choices, and your dignity. And perhaps the deepest calm is not the absence of feeling. It is the ability to feel deeply and still not lose yourself. It is the moment pain enters, but no longer sits on the throne inside you. It is when you understand that you can still be soft without being weak, still be wounded without being controlled, still be in pain without betraying your true self. That is the quiet but powerful sign that you have healed more than you once believed. Sign 2. You stop seeking validation from others. When a person no longer allows every wound to pull them back into old reactions, something else begins to quietly change. They no longer live as if their value is in someone else's hands, because the more clearly we understand the world within, the less we need the outside world to constantly confirm that we are good enough, lovable enough, worthy enough to remain. A deeper journey opens from here, one where a person no longer asks who they must become in order to be accepted, but begins to listen to what they have lost each time they try to please everyone. Number 1. You stop living to please everyone. There is a kind of exhaustion that is very difficult to name. It doesn't come from doing too much, nor from outer responsibilities. It comes from having lived for too long in the posture of needing to be accepted. Saying one sentence and fearing someone may be unhappy, refusing one request and immediately feeling guilty, making one choice for yourself and having to think about who will be disappointed, who will judge you, who will leave. Gradually, life is no longer lived from within. It becomes a stage where you are constantly adjusting the lighting, the voice, and the expression so the audience will not feel uncomfortable. Many people mistake this for kindness, but sometimes behind that kindness is a very deep fear. The fear that you will no longer be loved if you do not please others. The fear of being left behind if you speak honestly. The fear of being judged if you live differently from familiar expectations. A person may smile a lot, agree very quickly, help very enthusiastically, but inside they are slowly wearing themselves down because they no longer know what they truly want. In everyday life, this appears very quietly. Some people take on more work even when they are exhausted, only because they are afraid of being seen as not dedicated enough. Some people are always the first to text, the first to apologize, the first to make peace, even when they are not always the one at fault. Some people choose a major, a career, a partner, even a way of life simply because it reassures their family or earns society's approval. They may not exactly hate their life, but deep inside, there is always a strange emptiness, as if they are living correctly in the eyes of others, but wrongly according to the rhythm of their own heart. From a psychological perspective, the need for recognition is very natural. Human beings need connection, belonging, and the feeling of being seen. But when that need becomes the center of identity, we begin to lose the right to define ourselves. One compliment can lift us very high. One criticism can pull us very low. At that point, self-worth becomes like a leaf placed in the wind, moved by whatever anyone says. Jung viewed this phenomenon through the concept of persona, the social mask human beings use to adapt to life. Persona helps us live within a community, behave appropriately, maintain boundaries, and avoid exposing everything most private within us. But when a person identifies completely with that mask, they begin to believe that their true self only has value when it is accepted by others. The problem is not having a persona. Everyone needs a face to step into the world. The problem is whether we still know how to take it off. As you heal, you begin to realize that you have played a role for too long. the role of the lovable one, the strong one, the understanding one, the one who never bothers anyone. Those roles once helped you feel safe, but they also carried you farther away from yourself. Change begins in very small moments. You no longer automatically say yes when your heart wants to say no. You no longer force a smile at a sentence that hurts you. You no longer explain too much just so others will not misunderstand. You know that some people will not like the more honest version of you, but that no longer has enough power to make you return to the old agreeable version. Imagine a life spent pleasing others as wearing a shirt that fits everyone except your own body. From the outside, people may praise the shirt for being beautiful, polite, and appropriate. But only the person wearing it knows how it tightens at the shoulders, presses against the chest, and makes every breath harder. Healing is the moment you no longer choose the shirt simply because it looks good in the eyes of the crowd. You begin to choose what allows you to breathe. This does not make you selfish. On the contrary, it makes your kindness more genuine. When you no longer please others out of fear of being abandoned, you can love without losing yourself. You can help without resentment. You can listen without betraying your own needs. You are no longer kind as a hidden transaction in exchange for recognition, but kind because something inside you has become more whole. And perhaps the clearest sign that you have stopped living to please everyone is when you can accept someone else's discomfort without immediately seeing it as your fault. Someone may be disappointed, but you still know your choice is necessary. Someone may disagree, but you do not rush to doubt your entire worth. Someone may no longer look at you the same way, but you no longer lose your inner center because of it. That is a very deep step in healing. Because from the moment you no longer ask the world for permission to be yourself, you begin to step out of the mask that once exhausted you. And when you no longer live to please everyone, you do not become more distant. You simply become more real, clearer, and closer to the person you had long forgotten in your effort to be loved. Number 2, what makes you no longer depend on praise? And when a person begins to stop living to please everyone, they gradually realize something even more subtle. Praise may warm the heart, but it should not be the only place where they feel their value is held. Because if the feeling of worthiness only appears when someone recognizes you, then the moment that recognition is absent, the entire inner world immediately becomes empty again. This is not freedom. It is a very quiet, very gentle form of dependence, but strong enough to make a person lose their center. There are people who spend their whole lives chasing praise without realizing it. They work a little harder to be praised, endure a little more to be seen as understanding, succeed a little more to be admired, become a little kinder to be loved. Each compliment is like a sip of water in a deep thirst, soothing the heart for a moment, but never lasting long enough. Because what they truly lack is not a few words of recognition from the outside, but a stable feeling that they still have value even when no one sees them. A literary story that beautifully reflects this is the journey of Jo March in Little Women. Jo has always had a strong, direct, creative nature, and she does not easily fit into the social mold expected of women in her time. She wants to write, to be free, to live through her own voice. But that path is not easy, because the world around her has very clear standards for how a girl should be gentle, what kind of life she should choose, and who she should become in order to be seen as lovable and proper. Jo also longs to be recognized. She wants her work to be seen. She wants her talent to be acknowledged. She wants to prove that her voice has value. But the most beautiful point in Jo's journey is not that she receives more praise. It is that she gradually understands her creative voice cannot live only on applause. If she writes only to be recognized, she will always have to bend herself toward the taste of others. If she lives only to be liked, she will have to sacrifice the most alive part within her. Jo's growth is the journey from wanting the world to confirm her, to daring to remain faithful to what is truly burning inside. Even when recognition comes slowly, comes rarely, or sometimes does not come at all. This is also what Jung would call a movement away from persona. Persona always wants to be accepted because they are born to adapt to society. It asks, "What will others think of me?" But the deeper part of the human being asks a different question. Is this true to me? As healing deepens, the second question begins to carry more weight than the first. You can still feel happy when you are praised, but you no longer allow praise to decide whether what you do has meaning. What makes you no longer dependent on praise is not coldness. It is self-knowing. You know how hard you have tried, even when no one sees it. You know where your choice comes from, even when no one fully understands. You know one silent day does not erase your entire value. As that self-knowing grows, praise is no longer your source of life. It becomes only a beautiful echo. If it comes, you appreciate it. If it does not, you still continue walking. Imagine praise as lamps hanging along a road. They can make the journey brighter, warmer, more comforting. But if you only know how to walk when the lights outside are on, you will panic every time the road goes dark. Healing is when a small light begins to appear inside you. It does not shine brightly to draw attention, but it is enough for you to know where you are, why you are walking, and why you should not turn back simply because someone has not applauded. From here, praise returns to its proper place. It is a gift, not an oxygen tank. You can still be grateful when you are recognized. You can still feel happy when your effort is seen. But that joy no longer turns into dependence. You no longer doubt your entire path just because no one praised you today. You no longer force yourself to become the version most easily applauded, while the true person inside grows increasingly unfamiliar. And perhaps the clearest sign is when you still do the right thing, even in silence. You still keep promises to yourself, even when no one witnesses them. You still choose what is healthy, even when others do not understand. You still continue to grow, even when no one has named your effort yet. At that point, you no longer search for praise to know you have value. You simply receive it, like a soft breeze passing by a house that has begun to build its own foundation. Number 3. Your value begins to come from within. After a long time searching for confirmation from the outside, there will be a very quiet moment when a person begins to return to themselves. Not through a powerful declaration, and not by pretending they need no one. Simply on an ordinary day, before an effort no one praises, a choice no one fully understands, a change no one sees, you begin to realize, what is right for me still has value, even when the world has not yet named it. Value that comes from within is not the feeling of being confident all the time. It is also not repeating positive affirmations while deep inside you are still afraid of being judged. It is quiet, knowing that you still have dignity on the days you are not recognized, still have meaning in your silent efforts, still deserve respect even when someone does not understand your choices. This steadiness does not separate you from the world. It simply helps you stop handing over the entire authority to define yourself to the world. From Jung's perspective, this is when a person begins to identify less with persona, the social mask that once helped us survive, but can also make us forget who we are. Persona always needs feedback. It wants to know whether it is liked, whether it is good enough, whether it is playing the right role. But the deeper part of the human being does not live on applause. It lives through honesty with the essence of being. The closer a person moves towards self, the less they need to become the version that is easiest to praise, and the more they begin to live as someone with an inner center. From here, the most important thing is not to fight against praise, but to place praise in its proper position. Praise can warm the heart. It can be a beautiful gift. It can make a tiring day feel lighter. But it should not be the pillar holding up your entire self-esteem, because anything built entirely from the outside will easily be shaken by the outside. A person who has healed more does not reject recognition. They simply no longer live in the hunger to be constantly recognized. Imagine inner value as a house built on a deep foundation beneath the ground. Others may see the paint, the lights, the windows, the things that are easy to notice, judge, and praise. But what keeps the house standing does not lie in the part others see. It lies in the place most people rarely pay attention to. If the foundation is weak, even one wind of criticism can make the whole house shake. But when the foundation is strong enough, praise becomes sunlight on the roof, no longer the thing that keeps the house from collapsing. What you need to do is simply begin to recognize the victories that have no audience. One time, you do not put yourself down after a mistake. One time, you say no to something that drains you. One time, you keep a promise to yourself even when no one knows. One time, you choose what is healthy instead of what is easy to praise. These things may be small, but they are teaching the unconscious a new truth. My value does not disappear just because no one sees it. Then, in moments when you need to make a choice, try asking yourself one very simple question. After this, will I still be standing on my own side? That question helps you distinguish between being liked and living truthfully. There are yeses that make others happy but make you smaller inside. There are decisions no one applauds, but they help you keep your respect for yourself. Each time you choose something that does not betray what is inside, your value takes root a little deeper. Gradually, you will realize that recognition is still precious, but it is no longer the only measure of who you are. You can still feel happy when you are seen, but you no longer collapse when you are overlooked. You can still listen to feedback, but you do not let one criticism erase your entire dignity. You still love, connect, and contribute, but you no longer step into the world like someone holding an empty bowl, waiting for someone else to fill it. And perhaps this is a very clear sign that you have healed more than you realize. You begin to live like someone with roots, not always strong, not always certain, but increasingly less swept away by every wind of outside judgment. You no longer have to keep proving that you are worthy. You simply live quietly according to what you know is true, allowing each small choice to build a steadiness no one can give you and no one can take away. If this part touches something within you, leave one sentence in the comments. I am learning to stand on my own side. Sometimes writing a sentence like that is not about being recognized by anyone else. but about letting yourself hear the new voice growing inside. The voice that no longer asks the world for permission to believe that you have value. Sign 3. You are peaceful enough to be alone. When external validation no longer determines your worth, the most important relationship in your life also begins to heal, your relationship with yourself. From that point on, being alone is no longer something you fear. It becomes a peaceful space where your inner world can return to balance. Number 1. Loneliness is no longer something you fear. Some people always need something to be happening around them. A phone that constantly lights up, a conversation that never seems to end, a schedule filled from morning to night, a relationship that no longer brings peace, yet is still held onto. From the outside, they may seem deeply engaged with life, but beneath the surface, what they truly fear is not quietness. It is the moment when they are left alone with their own thoughts. The more noise there is, the more comfortable they feel. The busier they remain, the less they have to confront what is happening within their soul. This is why so many people confuse loneliness with abandonment. One evening without a message is enough to make them feel invisible. One weekend without plans is enough to make them believe that something is missing from their life. Some people rush into another relationship immediately after one has ended. Not because their heart is ready to love again, but because they are not yet peaceful enough to remain with the emptiness inside them. What they are avoiding has never truly been solitude. What they are running from is the encounter with themselves. Perhaps this is why Carl Jung believed that what human beings avoid is not only found in the outside world, but also in the parts within themselves that they have not yet found the courage to face. The more afraid we are of looking inward, the more easily we turn to busyness, endless conversations, or the presence of other people to fill the emptiness. But what is not brought into consciousness does not disappear. It simply waits quietly in the unconscious until the day we become mature enough to return and face it. During a Jungian discussion, I once met a woman named Olivia Morgan. After the end of a relationship that had lasted for many years, what haunted her most was not the fact that the man had left. What frightened her were the evenings when she returned to an apartment where no one else was waiting. Olivia always kept the television on, played a podcast, or held her phone for hours. It was not because she genuinely enjoyed those sounds. She simply could not tolerate the stillness of the room. Only when every sound disappeared did she feel an enormous emptiness beginning to rise within her. The change did not come through a dramatic event. It began with one very small decision. Every evening, Olivia allowed the room to remain quiet for 10 minutes before turning anything on. At first, those moments of silence felt painfully long. Old memories, emptiness and anxiety appeared one after another. But instead of continuing to cover them up, she simply stayed. After several weeks, Olivia realized that what she had feared all along was never being alone. What she feared was that she had never learned how to be with herself. From that moment, silence was no longer her enemy. It became the place where she began to understand herself more deeply. The more I reflected on Olivia's story, the more I realized that her experience was not unusual. Many people are living in exactly the same way without being aware of it. They believe they need another person to love, another appointment, another job, or another goal before the emptiness will disappear. But sometimes, what we need is not to add something more. What we need is enough courage to stop. Only in that pause do we have the opportunity to recognize that the emptiness within us does not exist because other people are absent. It exists because we have spent too long without truly being present with ourselves. This journey is like entering a room that has been locked for many years. As long as we remain outside the door, we imagine that everything inside must be dark and frightening. But when we are calm enough to open the door and stay there long enough, we realize that the room was never trying to harm us. It was only holding the emotions, memories, and forgotten parts of ourselves that had been left behind. The frightening thing is not the room itself. The frightening thing is that we may spend years refusing to enter it. Perhaps this is one of the clearest signs that you have healed more than you realize. It is not that you no longer need relationships, but that you no longer see another person's presence as a condition for feeling whole. An evening alone no longer sends you into panic. A quiet moment no longer forces you to fill it immediately. You begin to understand that peace does not always come from having someone beside you. Sometimes it comes from being able to sit with yourself without wanting to escape. And that is also the moment when loneliness stops being something you fear and becomes a space where you can truly return to yourself. Number 2, when silence becomes a place of healing. After enough time has passed and being alone no longer feels frightening, a person begins to see silence differently. What once made them hurry to fill every empty space now becomes a rare place where the mind can rest. They no longer feel that they must constantly play music, open a video, or hold their phone simply to make the room feel less quiet. Gradually, they recognize that silence was never what exhausted them. What exhausted them was living for too long without allowing themselves to experience stillness. In modern life, people are left with almost no empty space. The moment they wake up, they look at their phone. They go to work surrounded by conversations and notifications. On the way home, they continue filling their minds with music or social media. At night, many people still need something playing before they can fall asleep because they cannot bear a room that feels too quiet. Life continues through an endless stream of sound until we forget what it feels like to sit still for a few minutes without needing to do anything. Yet it is precisely in the moments when noise no longer covers everything that the inner world begins to speak. Memories that seem to have been asleep for years suddenly return. Emotions that were once pushed aside unexpectedly rise to the surface. Questions we have postponed for a long time also begin to appear more clearly. Many people believe that silence causes them more pain. In truth, it merely reveals what has already been there for a very long time. The pain does not come from the stillness. It comes from the parts of the soul that have never been heard. This is also what Carl Jung repeatedly emphasized when speaking about the unconscious. For Jung, the unconscious is not a place separated from life. It is always quietly attempting to enter into dialogue with consciousness. Unfortunately, most people live too quickly to hear that dialogue. We are accustomed to reacting the moment an emotion appears. We search for answers outside ourselves before looking within. As a result, the subtle signals of the soul are often ignored until they accumulate into exhaustion, disorientation, or a deep emptiness that is difficult to name. What is remarkable is that as healing begins, silence no longer carries the meaning of isolation. It becomes a space where a person can reorganize the inner world. Some things that once seemed impossible to understand suddenly become clearer after a quiet morning walk. Some decisions that caused months of inner conflict are finally made after an evening spent simply sitting beneath the sky. It is not because silence gives us the answer. It is because silence removes the noise that prevents us from hearing the answer already present within us. Imagine the mind as a mirror covered in steam. Each day, worries, expectations, and pressure add another layer of mist. We continue looking into the mirror, but the longer we look, the less clearly we can see our own face. Silence is like patiently wiping away each layer of steam. It does not create a new person. It simply allows your true image to become visible again. And the more clearly you see yourself, the less easily you are pulled away by things that were never truly yours. Perhaps this is why people who have healed no longer feel guilty for spending time in stillness. They do not see it as laziness or wasted time. They understand that just as the body needs sleep in order to recover, the soul also needs pauses in which to process everything it has experienced. Without those pauses, emotions continue piling on top of one another, while a person moves farther and farther away from their authentic inner voice. Silence also teaches an important lesson. Not every emotion requires an immediate reaction. Some sadness only needs to be accompanied. Some anger only needs to be observed. Some anxiety only needs a little more time before it begins to settle on its own. When you stop rushing to fight every uncomfortable emotion, you begin to see that emotions are like waves. They arrive, remain for a while, and eventually pass. What matters is not how large the wave becomes, but whether you still allow it to carry you away as it once did. Through these quiet moments that may appear completely ordinary, the inner world begins to recover in the most natural way. Once the soul has learned to find peace in silence, being alone is no longer something you must merely endure. It gradually becomes a period of time you genuinely value, because it is where your true self can exist in peace. Number 3. You begin to enjoy your own company. After repeatedly learning to move through the fear of loneliness and listen to silence, a very natural change begins to take place. You no longer see time alone as something you must tolerate. Instead, it becomes a part of life that you genuinely value. This is not because you have grown tired of the world, nor because you no longer need relationships. It is simply because, perhaps for the first time, your own presence has become enough to bring you peace. This change is very difficult for other people to see. They may only notice that you spend more time by yourself. They see that you can turn down an invitation in order to stay home and read, take a walk alone, or simply sit quietly beside a cup of tea. But what they cannot see is the transformation that has occurred within you. In the past, you were alone because there was no other choice. Now, you choose to be alone because it is the time that helps you return to your deepest sense of balance. Many people fear that if they become comfortable with being alone, they will become withdrawn or distant from others. But what usually happens is exactly the opposite. When you no longer depend on other people to fill the emptiness within you, you enter relationships with greater ease. You no longer love simply to escape loneliness. You no longer hold on to someone because you are afraid of losing your sense of safety. You also stop forcing every conversation to continue simply because you fear returning to a quiet room, because you no longer carry that same inner lack. You begin to love more freely. From Carl Jung's perspective, the journey of individuation always leads a person toward becoming a whole individual, rather than remaining one half who is constantly waiting for someone else to complete them. This does not mean that human beings must separate themselves from the world. It simply reminds us that a healthy relationship is not built by two people who are trying to fill each other's emptiness. It is built by two people who have learned to stand firmly within their own inner lives. Only when you can remain peacefully with yourself can you truly remain peacefully with another person. Imagine this as a tree whose roots have grown deep into the earth. It still receives the wind. It still reaches toward the sunlight. It still needs rain in order to grow. But its life no longer depends on every passing breeze. The human inner world works in the same way. Once you have developed roots within yourself, praise and criticism, the arrival and departure of others can still stir emotion, but they no longer have enough power to pull you out of yourself. The most beautiful part of this stage is that you begin to discover joy in very ordinary things. Waking a little earlier to watch sunlight pass through the window, walking without headphones, reading a book slowly without feeling the need to finish it quickly, eating a meal alone without feeling empty. These things may once have seemed dull. Now they become moments of rest that nourish the soul, not because life has become less demanding, but because you have stopped losing your ability to feel the beauty of simple things. What you need to do is not force yourself to enjoy being alone. Peace does not come through force. It grows through the small moments of stillness you intentionally give yourself throughout the day. Try putting your phone down a few minutes earlier before going to sleep. Take a walk without playing music. Sit beside a window and observe your thoughts passing by without immediately judging them. At first, it may feel unfamiliar. But over time, you will realize that the more time you spend in your own company, the more clearly you understand what genuinely makes you happy and what is merely a habit of following the world. In the end, healing does not make you love isolation. It helps you stop being afraid of your own company. When your own presence becomes enough to bring you peace, you no longer enter life with the feeling that something is always missing. From that point on, relationships, success, and joy are no longer things you use to fill an emptiness. They become beautiful additions to an inner world that is already whole. Sign 4. You are no longer afraid to face yourself. The moment you truly begin to enjoy being with yourself is also the moment a deeper door begins to open. You do not only meet peace, you also meet fear, wounds, and emotions that were once rejected. Healing continues when you are calm enough to look into yourself without turning away. Number 1. You dare to look at the imperfect parts of yourself. The hardest part of growing up is not realizing that you have flaws. The hardest part is seeing them without rushing to deny them, justify them, or condemn yourself. Because many people spend their whole lives building the image they want others to see, yet rarely dare to be honest with the person living inside them. They try to appear strong while they are wounded. Try to appear forgiving while anger still lives in their heart. Try to appear satisfied while deep down there is still envy, insecurity, or shame. Not because they are fake, but because they believe that only by hiding those parts can they be worthy of love. But what is hidden never truly disappears. It only changes form. A person who always denies their anger may become sharp and bitter in their words. A person who always pretends they need no one may quietly resent others when they are not cared for. A person who dares not admit their envy may turn someone else's success into a reason to punish themselves. These reactions do not appear because people are bad. They appear because there are parts within that have never been seen with honesty. Jung viewed this phenomenon through the concept of persona, the social mask that helps human beings adapt to life. He wrote, "The persona is a complicated system of relations between individual consciousness and society, fittingly enough, a kind of mask. Persona is not bad. It helps us behave appropriately and maintain balance within society. But when a person identifies with that mask, they begin to believe they must always be strong, kind, and correct in order to be loved. And from there, every emotion that does not fit that image is pushed into shadow, causing them to move farther away from their true self." In Greek mythology, the story of Perseus facing Medusa is a beautiful symbol of facing the frightening things within. Medusa was an image so terrifying that anyone who looked directly at her would turn to stone. But Perseus did not rush in recklessly. He used a shield polished like a mirror to look at Medusa's reflection, then slowly moved closer. That story resembles the way human beings need to face the imperfect parts within themselves. If we look too quickly, we may be overwhelmed by shame, fear, or self-hatred. But if we are calm enough to observe through the mirror of consciousness, what once frightened us begins to become understandable. Daring to look at your imperfect parts does not mean surrendering and letting them control you, nor does it mean excusing every mistake. On the contrary, it is a very deep form of responsibility. You can say, "Yes, I am angry, but I do not need to turn that anger into words that hurt someone else." You can say, "Yes, I feel envious, but I can use it to understand what I am longing for." You can say, "Yes, I am vulnerable, but that vulnerability does not make me worthless." Once something is acknowledged, it no longer has to secretly control us from behind. Imagine your inner world as a garden that has not been cared for in a long time. The beautiful parts are protected, while the thorny, overgrown, difficult corners are left in the shade. But they do not disappear. They quietly spread and begin to affect the entire garden. Shadow is the same. Rejected emotions, desires, and fears still influence the way you love, think, and respond. Only when you are brave enough to step into that garden do you begin to realize not everything growing wild needs to be uprooted. Some things only need to be understood and placed back where they belong. Healing happens when you stop standing outside that garden in fear and begin tending it with consciousness. You see anger and understand that behind it may be a boundary that was once violated. You see envy and understand that it may be a forgotten seed of life, pointing toward a longing you have not yet lived. You see fear and understand that it once tried to keep you safe in a clumsy way. These parts are no longer things that must be rejected. They become signals, data, and traces that help you understand the garden within you more fully. This is why people who have healed more than they realize are no longer so afraid of the truth about themselves. They do not need to always be right, beautiful, noble, or wise. They can see their imperfections without immediately collapsing. They can admit mistakes without destroying themselves. They can acknowledge an uncomfortable emotion without seeing it as their entire identity. That ability creates a very different kind of maturity. Not perfection, but honesty. And when a person becomes honest enough to look into themselves, they begin to reclaim power from what was once hidden. The imperfect parts are no longer enemies to be buried, but invitations to understand the inner world more deeply. From here, the healing journey enters a new layer. You no longer seek peace only by staying away from the noise outside. You begin to find peace by no longer having to run from any part of yourself. Number 2, shadow is no longer something to run from. From the moment you no longer rush to deny the imperfect parts of yourself, the way you see yourself also begins to change. Emotions once seen as shameful are no longer immediately pushed down. A flash of anger, a little envy, a fear, a desire to be recognized, all of these are no longer treated as proof that you are a bad person. They become signs that need to be listened to, because sometimes what disturbs us the most is pointing toward a part of the truth we have avoided seeing for too long. Shadow does not usually appear as something unfamiliar. It shows itself quietly in everyday life, through a reaction that feels too strong, a judgment that comes out too quickly, an irritation with no clear reason, or a sting when we see someone else living something we have not dared to live. You may feel uncomfortable around someone who is very confident, even though they have done nothing wrong. You may feel a small ache when someone else is praised, then immediately blame yourself for being petty. You may say you are fine, while inside there is a part of you growing bitter because it feels forgotten. From a Jungian perspective, shadow is not only the dark part of a person, it is everything we have pushed out of the image we want to keep about ourselves. A person who always wants to see themselves as generous will find it very hard to admit they are envious. A person who always wants to appear strong will find it very hard to say they need support. A person used to playing the role of the kind one will feel ashamed when they recognize anger in their heart. So instead of seeing these emotions as signals, we often rush to bury them. But what is buried does not disappear. It only finds another way to return. A very ordinary example is the discomfort you feel when seeing someone live something you once wanted. A friend dares to leave a stable job and start again. A colleague is recognized for an ability you also secretly long for. A family member dares to say no very clearly while you have been used to enduring. On the surface, the emotion may appear as judgment. They are too reckless, they are just lucky, they are selfish. But beneath that judgment, sometimes there is a truer sentence. I also want to be that free, but I do not dare yet. This is very important. Shadow does not only contain what we want to remove, it also contains life energies that were once forbidden. Some people bury their decisiveness because they were once told they were difficult. Some bury their ambition because they are afraid of being seen as selfish. Some bury their softness because they were once criticized for being too sensitive. Some bury their true voice because they grew up in an environment where silence was safer than honesty. And then, whenever they meet someone living the very part they once had to put away, they are not only uncomfortable with that person, they are uncomfortable because that person has unknowingly awakened something they have forgotten within themselves. Imagine shadow as the backside of a carefully woven rug. The front is the image you want the world to see: calm, kind, understanding, strong, mature. But the back contains knots, tangled threads, overlapping colors, and connections that do not look beautiful. If you only look at the front, you may think the back is something that should be hidden. But without those knots, the pattern on the front could not hold together. The human inner world is the same. The parts that once made you feel ashamed are sometimes the very place where a great deal of information about your wounds, needs, and unused strength is stored. Shadow is no longer something to run from when you begin to change the question. Instead of asking, "Why am I so terrible?" you ask, "What is this emotion pointing to within me?" Anger may be saying that a boundary has been crossed for too long. Envy may be pointing toward a longing that has not been lived. Fear may be protecting a part that was once wounded. Discomfort toward another person may be reflecting something within you that has not yet been acknowledged. With only a change in the question, the whole inner experience begins to move in a different direction. This does not mean following every emotion that appears. Acknowledging anger does not mean you have the right to hurt others. Seeing envy does not mean sabotaging someone else's success. Realizing that you want recognition does not mean returning to a life ruled by the gaze of the crowd. Maturity lies in being able to see the emotion without being possessed by it. You can name it, listen to its message, then choose a more conscious way to act. A person who has not recognized their shadow often lives as if pulled by invisible strings. They react strongly and regret it afterward. They judge and then feel empty. They control and then wonder why they are always tired. But when they begin to see the inner motives, those strings slowly become visible, and anything that has been seen no longer has absolute power as before. It may still be there, but it no longer silently pulls you without you understanding why. Shadow is no longer a place you have to run from, because you understand that wholeness does not mean keeping only the beautiful parts of yourself. Wholeness is daring to recognize both light and darkness, then bringing them into consciousness so they no longer silently control you. And from there, you become more truthful, more grounded, not because you are more perfect, but because you are no longer afraid to see yourself. Number 3. Truth liberates more than it wounds. The truth about oneself often frightens people, not because it is too cruel, but because it causes the familiar image we have tried to maintain for many years to collapse. We are afraid to realize that we are not as generous as we thought. Afraid to see that there is still envy, anger, weakness, selfishness, or pain within us. We fear that if we see too clearly, we will be disappointed in ourselves. But strangely, the very moment we dare to look directly at the truth is often the moment a person begins to be liberated. Because a truth that has been seen no longer needs to control us in the dark. A fear that has been named no longer needs to become controlled. An anger that has been acknowledged no longer needs to explode into words that wound others. A feeling of envy that is understood correctly no longer needs to become bitterness. When truth enters consciousness, it may hurt for a moment, but afterward, it returns to us something far more precious: the power to choose. There are people who only begin to change when they dare to tell themselves the truth. I am not okay the way I have pretended to be. I am angry, but I have hidden it for too long. I am envious not because the other person is wrong, but because they are living something I have not dared to live. I am tired because I keep trying to be the understanding one. These sentences may sound simple, but to the inner world, they are like loosening a knot that has been tightened for too long. They do not make a person weaker. On the contrary, they help them stop wasting energy fighting against themselves. From a Jungian perspective, truth is not a sentence. It is light. Light does not create dust in a room. It only makes the dust visible. In the same way, consciousness does not create darkness in a person. It only helps us see what has already been quietly existing, and once we see it, we no longer have to live like someone pulled by unconscious forces. We begin to understand why we react the way we do, why we choose wrongly again and again, why we always hurt in the same place. That understanding is the first step of freedom. Imagine walking through a forest at night with a small lamp in your hand. The darkness around you may frighten you, but the lamp does not make the forest more dangerous. It only helps you see where the roots are, where the path lies, where the cliff must be avoided. The truth about yourself is like that lamp. It does not make life more painful. It helps you stop walking in confusion, and sometimes, simply seeing where you are standing is enough to keep you from repeating the same fall. This does not mean truth is always pleasant. There are truths that make the heart sink. There are realizations that leave us silent for a long time. There are moments when we are forced to admit that we have deceived ourselves, stayed too long in a role, hurt others because we did not understand our own wounds. But that pain is different from the pain of unconsciousness. It does not drag us into the old loop. It opens the possibility of living differently. Truth liberates because it returns everything to its proper name. An unhealthy relationship is no longer called love. Endurance is no longer called nobility. Self-abandonment is no longer called kindness. Fear is no longer disguised as reason. And when these things are named correctly, a person is less likely to remain trapped in old stories they created themselves. The important lesson here is not to use truth to punish yourself. Use it to return to yourself. When you recognize a weakness, do not rush to say, "I am terrible." Ask instead, "What is this trying to help me understand?" When you see an old reaction repeating, do not only blame yourself. Look at which fear, which wound, which unmet need it comes from. Truth only becomes healing when it is accompanied by honesty and kindness. In the end, a person who is no longer afraid to face themselves is not someone who has no darkness left. They simply no longer need to run from that darkness. They know they have parts that are not beautiful, but they do not let those parts define their whole being. They know they have been wrong, weak, and reactive out of fear, but they also know they can learn, repair, and live more consciously. And from that truth, a deeper kind of peace begins to appear. The peace of someone who no longer has to pretend before their own soul. Sign 5. You know how to let go of what no longer belongs to you. Right here, after you have become brave enough to face yourself, you begin to recognize a very quiet truth. Not everything you once loved, once needed, or once clung to still belongs to your present journey. There are relationships that once felt like shelter, but now only make you smaller. There are dreams that once suited the person you used to be, but no longer nourish the person you are becoming. And there are things we keep not because they are still beautiful, but because we fear the emptiness that may come after letting go. Number 1. You stop holding on out of fear. letting go does not begin with leaving. It begins in the moment you honestly recognize why you are staying. Some people stay in a relationship that no longer brings peace because they are afraid of loneliness. Some continue a job that drains them because they fear losing the image of stability. Some hold on to an old dream because they are afraid to admit that they have changed. On the outside, they may seem persistent. But deep within, what keeps them there is no longer love, loyalty, or responsibility, but fear. Fear makes people confuse attachment with being trapped. It makes us call endurance maturity, excessive sacrifice love, and self-betrayal, trying a little harder. But the body often knows the truth sooner than the mind. You may say that you are still fine, but every time you think about continuing, your heart becomes heavy. You may convince yourself that things will get better, but inside, there is still a quiet feeling that you are moving farther and farther away from yourself. In a Jungian therapy session, I once met a man named James Miller. He had worked at a financial company for nearly 10 years. The job was stable, the salary was good, his family was proud, and his friends admired him. From the outside, James had every reason to continue. But every morning when he woke up, he felt as if his body had become heavier under an invisible layer. He did not hate the job. What hurt him more was the feeling that he had become a very unfamiliar version of himself, a man who only knew how to fulfill a role while no longer hearing what was still alive inside him. At first, James thought the problem was that he was not grateful enough. He blamed himself for not feeling happy with what others called success. But the more he forced himself to be satisfied, the larger the emptiness became. During therapy, he slowly realized that what he feared was not only changing jobs. What he feared was losing the image of the successful man he had built over many years. He was not holding on because it still made him feel alive. He was holding on because he did not know who he would be if he put down that business card. A scientific perspective also helps us understand why letting go is so difficult. The human brain often reacts very strongly to loss. What is familiar, even when it is no longer healthy, still gives the nervous system a sense of safety because it can be predicted. A familiar relationship, a familiar job, a familiar role. All of these make us feel less afraid than stepping into the unknown. But safety does not always mean living truthfully. There are cages that are soft, clean, and familiar, but they are still cages. Imagine holding on out of fear as carrying an old suitcase on a long journey. At first, inside, it were things you truly needed. But over time, many things have outlived their purpose. Old papers, clothes that no longer fit, objects that once mattered but now only make the luggage heavier. You keep dragging it along because you think putting it down means losing something. But the farther you go, the more you realize that what exhausts you is not the road ahead, but the things you no longer need and still insist on carrying. Letting go is not denying the past. It does not mean what once mattered becomes meaningless. A relationship may once have been truly beautiful and still no longer be suitable. A dream may once have supported you and still may have completed its role. An old version of you may once have been necessary for survival, but it does not have to continue guiding the rest of your life. Healing is when you can thank what once helped you through one part of the road, then become brave enough to put it down when it no longer belongs to the new journey. The important thing is not to confuse letting go with failure. Some things leave not because you did not try hard enough, but because you have outgrown the old shape of your life. Some people no longer walk with you, not because the love you once had was false, but because two souls have finished the lesson meant for each other. Some choices must close not to punish you, but to return your energy to a truer direction. You stop holding on out of fear when you can ask yourself one simple question: am I holding this because it is still alive, or because I am afraid I will not know who I am if I let go? That question may leave you silent, but it may also open a necessary truth. Because there are things that continue to exist only because of your fear, not because of love. And when you recognize that, you begin to take back the power to choose. Number 2, losing something no longer means failure. There is a strange point on the healing journey. The same loss may occur, but the way we understand it has changed. In the past, when a relationship ended, an opportunity closed, or a plan could no longer continue, we easily saw it as a sign that we had done something wrong. We asked ourselves where we were not good enough, what we had missed, how we had failed. But as the inner world matures, we begin to look at loss with a wider gaze. Not everything that leaves our life is proof of failure. Sometimes, it is only a sign that a season has completed its role. There are things we once needed in order to survive, but no longer need in order to grow. A relationship once gave us a sense of belonging, but later made us lose our voice. A job once gave us stability, but the longer we stayed, the more it dried out the soul. A dream once helped us stand up during difficult years, but one day it may no longer fit the person we are becoming. If we keep seeing every ending as failure, we will never recognize that life also has seasons that must close, so something else can begin. From a Jungian perspective, human beings do not move through life in a fixed straight line. The process of individuation always pulls us away from old images, old roles, and old identifications. Sometimes what leaves does not leave to punish us, but to force us to return closer to the self. A loss may frighten the ego because the ego often clings to what is familiar in order to feel safe. But on a deeper level, loss sometimes opens the necessary space for a person to hear what they have forgotten for too long. Look at a simple example in life. Someone spends many years trying to hold on to a relationship, only to finally accept that the love no longer helps either person grow. At first, they only see themselves as having failed. Failed because they could not keep the original promise. Failed because they tried so hard, and it was still not enough. Failed because others may look in and say they did not know how to appreciate what they had. But after some time, when the pain softens, they realize that the ending did not erase the value of the love that once existed. It only said that the two people had reached a point where continuing to stay would cause both of them to lose themselves. Loss truly hurts. There is no need to deny that. There are nights after letting go when the heart still feels empty. There are mornings when old habits remain, as if one part of life has not yet understood that everything has changed. But pain does not mean wrong. A cut from removing something old can still sting. A change of season can still leave a tree bare for a while. What matters is not to use pain as proof that you chose wrongly. Some right choices still hurt because they ask us to leave what was once deeply familiar. Imagine loss as a tree needing to shed its leaves before winter. If the tree saw every falling leaf as failure, it would never understand the rhythm of life. Falling leaves do not mean the tree has died. It is simply conserving energy, returning what has completed its season, and preparing for another cycle. Human beings are the same. Some things leave us not because we are inadequate, but because keeping them would leave us without enough strength for the next part of life that needs to be nourished. This does not mean we take loss lightly. Healing is not telling yourself, "It is fine," while your heart is still hurting. Healing is allowing yourself to hurt without turning that pain into a sentence against yourself. You can miss someone without concluding that you are unlovable. You can feel sad because an opportunity has closed without seeing yourself as a failure. You can miss an old version of your life without needing to return and live inside it. Loss becomes more cruel only when we use it against ourselves. A very clear sign of maturity is that you no longer try to turn every ending into a story about blame. You begin to ask deeper questions. What did this teach me? What part of me grew because of it? What in that old relationship, job, or dream was once true, and what is no longer true? When you dare to ask this way, you are not denying the past. You are simply returning it to its proper place, a chapter that helped shape you, but does not have to be the entire book. From here, loss is no longer only an emptiness. It becomes a form of purification. It takes away what is no longer aligned, so you can see more clearly what is still alive within you. It hurts you, but it also makes you more truthful. It slows you down, but it also helps you stop dragging along things whose season has ended. And sometimes, what you once called failure is actually the moment life quietly removes from you a burden you were not yet brave enough to put down on your own. So when something leaves your life, do not rush to see it as the end of your value. Perhaps it is only the end of an old version, an old role, an old way of loving, an old way of living. And when you can hurt without condemning yourself, feel sadness without returning to self-betrayal, feel regret while still understanding that you are being led toward a wider truth, you have healed more than you realize. Losing something no longer means failure. Sometimes it is the way life creates space for the truer part of you to step forward. Number 3. Letting go becomes a way of loving yourself. Letting go only truly becomes healing when it is no longer done from desperation, anger, or the need to prove something to someone. Some people leave a relationship by forcing themselves to become cold. Some abandon a dream by saying it never mattered. Some bury an old version of themselves by denying everything they once loved, needed, and hoped for. But that is not yet deep letting go. That is still a way of fighting against pain. Letting go in healing is not cutting something off with bitterness, but putting it down with understanding. When you begin to love yourself more, you no longer let go in order to punish someone else, or to prove that you are strong. You let go because you realize there are things that, the longer you keep them, the farther they take you from your true self. A relationship may once have been very beautiful, but if staying makes you constantly shrink your voice, hide your emotions, and doubt your own value, then leaving is not betrayal. It is the way you protect the part of yourself that is tired from enduring for too long. Letting go also does not mean acting as if everything never happened. On the contrary, it requires a great deal of honesty. You can admit that you once loved deeply, hoped greatly, and believed this thing would walk with you for longer. You can feel sad that it is no longer as it was. You can remember beautiful moments without returning to the place that wounds you. You can honor the past and still choose not to keep living inside it. That is a very gentle form of maturity, not denying what once had meaning, but also not using old meaning to keep losing yourself. From a Jungian perspective, letting go is a very important part of the journey of individuation. To become more truly ourselves, we do not only need to reclaim the parts that were rejected, we also need to put down the roles, images, and attachments that no longer reflect the self. There are things that once helped the ego feel safe, but dried out the soul. There are choices that once brought us recognition, but the longer we followed them, the farther they carried us from the truth within. So, letting go is not losing yourself. Very often, it is the way the true self returns. What you can do is not force yourself to let go immediately. Healing does not demand one huge decision in a single day. It often begins with very small actions. Sending one less message, just to hold on to a silence that has already become clear. Taking on one less responsibility simply because you fear someone's disappointment. Returning one less time to an old place only because of a sudden moment of loneliness. Telling yourself one less time that you must endure a little more to prove you are good enough. Each time you stop an action that comes from fear, you are quietly choosing to stand on your own side. Letting go also needs a healthy way of grieving. Do not force yourself to feel light immediately. Do not ask the heart to forget faster than it is able. There are things that, even when it is right to put them down, still make the heart sad. Allow yourself to feel regret, to miss, to cry, to be silent, but do not let sadness become the reason you return to betraying yourself. The sadness after letting go is not a sign that you were wrong. It only says that this thing once truly mattered. And precisely because it once mattered, you need to put it down with respect, not hatred. A gentle way to begin is to look back at the old thing with two different hands. One hand holds gratitude. What did this once give me? How did it teach me to love, to be strong, to hope, or to grow? The other hand holds honesty. What is this taking from me now? How is it making me smaller, more exhausted, or farther from myself? When you can hold both at the same time, you are no longer extreme. You do not turn the past into an enemy, and you do not idealize it so much that you forget the present. You see it fairly enough to know when it is time to put it down. There is a very clear sign that letting go has become a way of loving yourself. You no longer need to hate the old thing in order to leave. You can say goodbye with a strange tenderness, not because it does not hurt, but because you understand that you do not need to turn the past into an enemy in order to have the right to choose the future. You can thank what was once there and still continue walking. You can keep the lesson without keeping the chain. You can love a memory without allowing that memory to continue deciding your present life. Thank you for accompanying me to the middle of this journey. Before we continue, pause for 1 second and answer honestly. Is there something in your life that needs to be put down? Not because it never mattered, but because it no longer helps you live in alignment with yourself. If you are brave enough, leave your story in the comments. Not to prove that you are strong, but so you can hear the truth. Your heart has been speaking very softly for a long time. It is time to stop abandoning yourself in order to hold on to what no longer belongs to you. Sign 6. You look at others with more understanding. If letting go is the moment you stop clinging to what no longer belongs to you, then understanding is when your heart no longer needs to turn everyone into the one at fault, just so you can feel lighter. You begin to realize that every person is carrying a story we can never fully see from the outside. And when you have learned to put down your own burdens, you also become less quick to place judgment on someone else's shoulders. Number 1. You no longer rush to judge. There is a very quiet sign of healing. You no longer immediately draw conclusions about a person based on one action, one sentence, one weak moment, or one choice you do not agree with. In the past, you may have looked at someone who was angry and thought they were difficult, looked at someone who was silent and thought they were cold, looked at someone who failed and thought they did not try hard enough. But after you yourself have gone through enough dark places within, you begin to understand that human beings are rarely as simple as the first expression they reveal. A person who gets angry easily may have lived for many years with the feeling of not being respected. A person who is overly controlling may have grown up in insecurity. A person who constantly boasts may be trying to hide the feeling that they are not valuable enough. A person who withdraws from every conversation may not be arrogant, but simply exhausted. This does not mean we excuse every wrong behavior, but it helps us pause before turning one moment of someone's life into their entire nature. In Jane Austen's novel, Pride and Prejudice, Elizabeth Bennet initially sees Mr. Darcy through a very cold first impression. She sees him as arrogant, distant, and contemptuous of others. That discomfort grows stronger when she hears unfavorable stories about him from Wickham. In Elizabeth's eyes, Darcy almost becomes the image of pride she cannot accept. But later, as the truth gradually unfolds, she realizes that her first judgment was not entirely correct. Darcy is not simply a proud, emotionless man, and Wickham is not as innocent as his charming appearance suggests. What makes that story worth reflecting on is not that Elizabeth was wrong and Darcy was right. The deeper point is that she became honest enough to look back at the way she saw others. She realized that her judgment did not come only from Darcy's behavior, but also from her own pride, wounds, and quiet prejudices. That moment is very close to the journey of healing, not only seeing others more clearly, but recognizing that our own eyes were also once covered by emotions we did not yet understand. From Jung's perspective, this is the mechanism of projection. What has not yet been recognized within is often seen outside with greater intensity. We think we are seeing another person very clearly, but sometimes we are only seeing a part of ourselves that has not yet been reconciled. The selfish person who irritates us too much may be touching the personal needs we once denied. The confident person who annoys us may be touching the strength we have not dared to live. The vulnerable person we look down on may be touching the tenderness we were once taught to hide. Imagine judgment as looking at a face through trembling water. You can still see the shape, but every feature is distorted by the movement of the water. Ununderstood emotions are the same. They distort the image of another person in our eyes. An ordinary sentence can become offensive. A silence can be interpreted as contempt. A small mistake can be taken as proof that the other person is untrustworthy. Understanding begins when the water within becomes still enough for us to see more clearly before drawing a conclusion. This matters deeply because understanding does not mean allowing others to hurt you. You still have the right to set boundaries. You still have the right to leave toxic behavior. You still have the right to say that something is not okay with you, but you no longer need to turn the other person into someone completely bad in order to protect your decision. You can see that they hurt you while also understanding that they have wounds of their own. You may choose not to stay, but you no longer need to carry a heavy sentence against them in your heart. A person who has healed more than they realize often has the ability to look at life more gently without becoming weak. They no longer take pleasure in quickly calling someone wrong, bad, or blameworthy. They know that behind one behavior may be a long history of wounds, distorted learning, fear, and self-protection. They understand that a human being is not only what they do in their lowest moment. It is that understanding that softens the heart. This understanding first comes from having learned to understand yourself. When you have seen your own anger without hating yourself for it, you can more easily understand someone else's anger. When you have admitted your own fear, you become less likely to look down on another person's insecurity. When you have faced shadow, you are no longer surprised that other people also have parts that remain unhealed. You see them as human beings who are learning, making mistakes, defending themselves, and finding their way, just as you once did. And from here, not rushing to judge becomes a form of freedom. You no longer let the first reaction pull you into harshness. You know how to pause before concluding. You know how to look one layer deeper before accusing. You know how to distinguish between understanding a person and allowing them to cross your boundaries. That is a very deep kind of maturity. The heart remains soft, but consciousness is clear. You no longer need judgment in order to feel right. You are grounded enough to look at others with more understanding while still remaining honest with yourself. Number 2, other people become mirrors that help you understand yourself. Not rushing to judge others also means you begin to look back at your own reactions. Because sometimes, what makes us uncomfortable in another person is not only in them, but also in what they unknowingly awaken within us. From a Jungian perspective, relationships are not only where we exchange affection, but also where the unconscious reflects itself. What we admire too much in others may be a quality we have not dared to live in ourselves. What we dislike too intensely in them may be a part of shadow we have not accepted within ourselves. So sometimes, other people do not appear for us to blame them, but to help us read ourselves more clearly. This does not mean that every mistake another person makes is our projection. Wrong behavior is still wrong. Hurtful words still need to be named correctly. Some relationships still require clear boundaries. But a person who has healed more knows that before reaching a conclusion, they can pause and observe their own reaction. What is it about this person that makes me react so strongly? Why did that sentence touch me more deeply than usual? Am I seeing them, or am I seeing a part of my old memory through them? These questions do not make you weaker, they make you more awake. Imagine every person you meet as a mirror placed at a different angle inside the room of your inner world. Some mirrors help you see the beautiful parts of yourself more clearly. Some mirrors reveal the cracks you never wanted to look at. Some mirrors are distorted, making the image appear changed because old emotions within you are still trembling. If you only hate the mirror, you will miss the information it is reflecting. But if you know how to look more slowly, you may realize that your reaction to others is sometimes a very personal letter from the unconscious. You meet someone who always dares to say what they want. They refuse clearly, Set boundaries clearly and do not explain too much. At first, you may see them as selfish, hard, or difficult to approach. But if that discomfort is stronger than usual, beneath it there may be a part of you that envies that freedom. Perhaps you also want to say no like that, but have not dared to. Perhaps you have become so used to being the understanding one that seeing someone protect themselves makes you uneasy. That person is then not only someone who makes you uncomfortable. They become a mirror pointing to an ability you have forgotten. On the other hand, there are people who make you feel deeply admired. You look at the way they live, calmly, creatively, truthfully, freely, and you feel a quiet longing inside. That admiration is also a mirror. It says that within you there is a similar seed that wants to be nourished. We usually only truly resonate with something when there is already a corresponding piece of it within us. So the person you admire is not simply above you. They may be reminding you of a potential you have not yet lived in yourself. This is why understanding others always goes together with understanding yourself. Each time you react strongly, instead of only focusing on where the other person is wrong, give a little attention to what is happening within you. Not to take all the blame upon yourself, but so you do not miss the valuable data of your inner life. Discomfort, admiration, envy, the feeling of being threatened, all of these can become clues. When observed slowly enough, they help you recognize which wound remains, which longing remains, which part of you has not yet been lived. People who have healed more than they realize no longer see relationships only as places to be loved, recognized, or kept safe. They begin to see them as part of the journey of individuation. Every encounter can illuminate something. A person who hurts you may point to a boundary you need to learn. A person you admire may remind you of a quality that needs to be nurtured. A person who irritates you may lead you back to shadow. A person who truly loves you may help you see that you are still worthy of receiving love without having to perform any role. But there is one thing to remember. Not every mirror needs to be kept. Some people reflect an important lesson, but should still not remain close to you if they continually hurt you. Understanding does not mean staying. Seeing the lesson does not mean accepting toxic behavior. You can be grateful for what a person helped you realize and still choose to leave in order to protect your peace. That is maturity. Learning from a relationship without losing yourself inside it. And when other people become mirrors that help you understand yourself, your life also becomes less heavy. You no longer need to turn every conflict into a battle of right and wrong. You no longer see every discomfort as a reason to condemn. You begin to read your own reactions as signs on the inner map. From there, understanding is no longer only a beautiful attitude reserved for others. It becomes a way for you to move more consciously through the world, because every person you meet can help you see more clearly the person you are becoming. Number 3. Compassion appears after healing. Compassion does not appear because you have never been hurt. It often appears after you have gone through enough pain, enough misunderstandings, enough times of blaming yourself, to realize that human beings rarely live as simply as they appear on the outside. In the past, you may have thought others were wrong because they were weak, selfish, cold, or difficult to understand. But once you have seen the tangled places within yourself, you begin to understand that behind every behavior there is often a longer history, a fear, a wound, a form of self-protection, a need that has never been named. This is not the kind of pity that looks down from above. True compassion does not make you feel better than someone else. It makes you feel closer to them in your shared humanity. You recognize that you too have reacted wrongly when you were in pain. You too have stayed silent because you did not know what to say. You too have hurt others because you did not yet know how to care for your own wounds. You too have tried to appear strong while inside you only wanted someone to understand. That recognition softens the heart, not because it is weak, but because it has understood. From a Jungian perspective, when people project less of their shadow onto others, they also have less need to turn the world into a place filled with people who must be blamed. They no longer see someone only as the difficult one, the selfish one, the failure, or the one who hurt me. They begin to see a more complex human being, with light, darkness, wounds, effort, and limits of their own. This does not erase personal responsibility. A person must still be responsible for what they do, but compassion helps you not lock them forever inside the worst moment of their life. There is a very great difference between forgiving out of fear of conflict and having compassion because you have matured. Forgiving out of fear of conflict often makes us swallow our pain and call it nobility, but compassion after healing helps us see others more clearly while still not losing ourselves. You can understand why someone acted the way they did and still set boundaries. You can see their wounds, but not take responsibility for healing them. You can release resentment, but you do not necessarily have to return to the place that once hurt you. Compassion is like afternoon light falling over an old landscape. It does not erase the cracks, does not remove what has happened, and does not make everything perfect. But it allows us to see things with less harshness. The broken lines are still there, but they are no longer only signs of damage. They become traces of time, of endurance, of things that were struck and still continued to exist. When you look at others with that kind of light, you are not becoming more naive. You are simply becoming less cruel in the way you understand human beings. The most beautiful thing about compassion is that it frees both sides. It frees the other person from being trapped inside a single label you have placed on them. But more importantly, it frees you from the weight of condemnation. Because every time we keep someone fixed in the image of "they are terrible," a part of our mind must also remain in that story in order to defend that judgment. Compassion does not erase the past, but it helps us stop living forever in a posture of resistance against the past. People who have healed more than they realize no longer need hardness to prove they have moved on. They no longer believe they must become cold in order to be strong, indifferent in order to be free, or hold on to anger in order to protect themselves. They understand that there is another kind of strength, seeing another person's weakness without despising it, seeing mistakes without rushing to condemn, seeing pain without turning it into a reason to abandon their own boundaries. From there, the way you enter relationships also changes. You listen more, but you do not lose your own voice. You understand more, but you do not let understanding become the burden of having to save someone. You love more deeply, but you no longer love by forgetting yourself. Compassion after healing does not make you better at enduring. It makes you better at seeing clearly. seeing the pain of others, seeing your own limits, and seeing that real love never needs to come with self-betrayal. And perhaps this is the quietest beauty of this sign. When compassion appears, you no longer see life as a place with only right people and wrong people, good people and bad people, lovable people and blameworthy people. You begin to see human beings who are trying to live with all they know, all they lack, all they fear, and all they have not yet healed. You can still distinguish what is healthy from what is toxic. But your heart no longer needs to close in order to feel safe. It is wide enough to understand and awake enough not to forget to protect itself. Sign 7. You no longer try to become someone else. At this point, after learning to look at others with greater understanding, your attention also gradually turns back toward yourself. Because the journey of healing does not end with changing the way you see the world. It is also the moment you stop spending your whole life trying to become the version others want and begin to courageously live as your true self. Number 1. You stop chasing a perfect version of yourself. Some people have not failed in life, yet they always feel exhausted because they are trying to exist in a shape that is too tight. They know how to behave in order to be loved. They know how to say what others want to hear. They know how to hide the parts that are too different, too sensitive, too strong, or too real. Every day they cut away a little more of themselves to fit the frame of family, society, work, or a relationship. And after many years, what hurts them is not the absence of recognition, but being recognized as a version that no longer feels like them. This is a very deep kind of exhaustion, because living against yourself is not always loud. It can happen very quietly, each time you smile when your heart does not want to, stay silent when there is something you need to say, or choose the safe path while your soul is longing for another direction. From the outside, people may think you are fine, but inside, you feel as if you are wearing a beautiful outfit that does not fit. It makes you look proper in the eyes of others, but makes it hard to breathe in your own life. From Jung's perspective, this is when persona becomes too large. Persona helps us adapt to the world, hold our roles, and live within a community. But if we identify completely with persona, we gradually forget that this mask is only one part of us, not the whole of who we are. As you heal, you no longer want to destroy every social role. You simply no longer allow those roles to swallow the true voice within. A representative figure in American cinema is Viola Davis. Before becoming one of the most respected actors in Hollywood, she did not follow the kind of star image that the market could easily frame. Viola Davis built her path through difficult, fierce, deeply layered roles. Women who did not necessarily have to be likable, perfect, or softened, so audiences could accept them more easily. It was precisely that honesty that became her power. What is admirable about Viola Davis is not only the major awards. She has won an Oscar, an Emmy, a Tony, and a Grammy, becoming one of the few artists to achieve EGOT status. But what makes her story fit this sign is the way she did not try to erase her identity in order to become more pleasing to the eye. She brought to the screen the fierceness, pain, dignity, anger, vulnerability, and strength of characters often overlooked by life. There is something very clear in her. Art does not always need to make human beings look more beautiful. Sometimes art has value because it dares to make human beings appear more real. This is also what a person who is healing gradually learns. You no longer try to become the version most easily accepted. You begin to ask, what in me is true, even if not everyone will love it? You no longer force yourself to be gentle when something inside you needs a boundary. You no longer force yourself to be strong when today you truly need rest. You no longer force yourself to follow a path simply because it makes others feel reassured. You begin to choose honesty instead of only choosing approval. Imagine your true self as a distinct voice in a choir. If you keep trying to sing like the person beside you, you may avoid attention, avoid being criticized for being off-key, and avoid making anyone uncomfortable. But the song also loses the tone that only you can bring. Healing is not singing louder than everyone else. Healing is finding your true pitch again, clear enough not to disappear, harmonious enough to still live within the world. When you no longer try to become someone else, you can still learn from others, still change, still grow. But that change no longer comes from insecurity. It comes from the life within you wanting to develop. You do not imitate anyone to feel more valuable. You learn from them in order to become a more honest version of yourself. This is the great difference between growth and self-denial. This sign often appears very quietly. You begin to dress in a way that feels more comfortable to you. You speak an opinion you once always hid. You refuse a choice that no longer fits. You choose a job, a relationship, a rhythm of life that is closer to your nature. These things may not create a loud impact, but inside, you know you are beginning to stop betraying your true self just to remain safe within other people's expectations. And then, a new kind of peace appears. Not peace because everyone understands you, not peace because no one judges you anymore, but peace because you no longer need to trade your identity in order to remain in this world. You are still learning, still changing, still having days of uncertainty, but you no longer see life as a competition to become the person who best fits the mold. You begin to understand that being yourself is not a beautiful slogan. It is a very deep result of healing, where a person stops trying to become a copy and begins to live as a soul with its own shape. Number 2, you begin to live according to your own values. No longer trying to become someone else also means you begin to hear more clearly what truly matters to you. In the past, you may have lived according to many borrowed standards. What success should look like, how love should be proven, which path a proper person should choose, what a life worthy of pride should contain. But as you heal, you are no longer so easily led by those patterns. You begin to distinguish between what society praises and what truly feels right to your soul. Living according to your own values does not mean doing everything you like in a moment of impulse. It is a kind of honesty deep enough for you to know what can be compromised and what, if lost, would make you lose respect for yourself. Some people choose freedom, some choose peace, some choose truth. Whatever it is, that value becomes a quiet boundary that helps them stop living in choices that carry them farther away from themselves. A follower of the channel once shared that she had spent many years chasing the image of success her family wanted for her. She studied a field she did not love, worked a stable but emotionally dry job, and kept trying to appear grateful because at least everything was safe. But every night when she came home, she felt as if a very small place inside her was slowly going out. What awakened her was not a major event, but a very ordinary afternoon when she saw herself advising a younger sibling to live honestly with their dream, while she herself had never dared to do that for her own life. From that day on, she did not immediately abandon everything. She only began with smaller but more honest choices. She reclaimed a few hours each week for what she loved. She stopped saying, "I'm fine," whenever she was truly exhausted. She began to refuse certain invitations, certain responsibilities, and certain expectations that no longer fit. What mattered was not that she changed her life overnight. What mattered was that for the first time, she stopped asking, "What will everyone think?" and began listening to, "Is this still true for me?" From Jung's perspective, this is a very important step in the journey of individuation. A person cannot become themselves if they spend their whole life living by someone else's map. Family, society, culture, and community can all give us necessary guidance. But at some point, each person must recognize what is an outer voice and what is the call of self. Otherwise, we may live a life that looks very right in the eyes of others, yet is wrong for the deepest center within us. Personal values are like an inner compass. A compass does not make the road easier, nor does it remove all the fog ahead, but it helps you know which direction no longer belongs to you. Without a compass, you can easily follow the loudest call, the most attractive praise, the nearest fear, or the most familiar expectation. But once you know what you value, you can move more slowly and still not drift too far from yourself. Living according to your values also helps you become less pulled into endless comparison. When you do not yet know what matters to you, everyone can look like a measuring stick. Someone with more money makes you feel behind. Someone who builds a family earlier makes you feel confused. Someone more visible makes you doubt your own path. But once your values become clearer, you begin to understand that not every life needs to bloom in the same season. Some people choose speed, some choose depth, some choose freedom, some choose stability. What matters is not which choice receives more praise from the crowd, but which choice helps you not move away from yourself. A sign that you have healed more than you realize is that you begin to feel lighter in choices that once frightened you. You can say no without writing an entire justification. You can choose another path without seeing yourself as a failure. You can accept that some people will not understand, but that no longer has enough power to make you return to betraying yourself. You no longer live only to be seen as good, correct, successful, lovable, or worthy of pride in the eyes of others. You begin to live in such a way that when you are alone, your heart no longer feels as if you have left yourself behind somewhere out there. And when you live according to your own values, life does not necessarily become easier right away, but it becomes more real. Every choice, even a small one, begins to carry the mark of the person you are becoming. You no longer have to win in someone else's life. You only need to live closer each day to what you know is true. That is a very quiet kind of freedom, one that does not need to be displayed, does not need to be proven, but is deep enough to make you stop searching for yourself inside patterns that do not belong to you. Number 3, healing is the journey back to your true self. At some point, you will realize that healing is not about becoming a completely new person. It is like the process of taking off the roles, borrowed expectations, and fears that once made you live differently in order to be accepted. The truthful parts of you have never disappeared. They have only been covered by many years of trying to be understanding, strong, successful, always fine, and never disappointing anyone. When you no longer try to become someone else, those parts begin to find a way back. Returning to your true self is not a grand moment. It often begins very small. One day you tell the truth that you are tired instead of continuing to pretend you are fine. One time you choose silence, not because you are afraid, but because you do not want to betray what you feel inside. One decision you make is no longer meant to please everyone, but because it fits your values. From the outside, those moments may seem ordinary, but inside, they are signposts leading you closer to yourself. A subtle practice is to pay attention to the moments when your body feels lighter. The mind can justify things very well, but the body is often more honest. There are encounters that make your shoulders tighten. There are agreements that make your chest feel heavy. There are choices that look reasonable, but afterward leave you dry and drained of life. On the other hand, there are simple things that make your heart open. An honest conversation, a quiet evening, a small choice where you no longer have to perform. Let your body become a small bell reminding you what is bringing you closer to, or farther away from, your true self. You can also begin by giving the right name back to what you feel. Instead of saying, "I am too difficult," recognize, "Perhaps I need a boundary." Instead of saying, "I am too weak," understand that perhaps I have been tired for too long. Instead of saying, "I am too selfish," look and see whether this is the first time you are choosing to care for yourself. Each time you name an emotion correctly, you become a little less foreign to yourself. Another way is to keep one small action in your day that is not meant to impress anyone. Write a few lines that will not be posted anywhere. Listen to a song that brings back the softer part of you. Wear something that makes you feel natural, not something meant to be praised. Refuse one small thing that you would have accepted before only because you were afraid of upsetting someone. These actions do not change your whole life immediately, but they teach your nervous system something new. You do not need to betray yourself in order to exist. Imagine your true self as a stream covered by dry leaves, soil, and fallen branches after many storms. The stream is not gone. It is only hidden. Healing is not creating a new stream, but patiently clearing away each layer so the old water can flow again. Each time you live a little more truthfully, speak a little more honestly, choose a little more in alignment with yourself, that stream becomes clearer. Returning to your true self also does not mean everyone will understand you immediately. Some people may not be used to the version you are becoming. Some may miss the old you, the one who always agreed, always endured, always remained predictable. But that does not mean you are wrong. Sometimes, healing makes you harder to control for those who were once used to you having no boundaries. The most beautiful thing about this journey is that you do not need to complete it in one day. Each day, you only need to return a little, pretend a little less, abandon yourself a little less, choose from fear a little less. Healing does not require you to become perfect in order to deserve to live truthfully. It only invites you to be honest enough not to keep moving farther away from yourself. And when you have reached this final sign, you may realize that all the previous changes have been leading to the same place. You no longer react as you once did, no longer need praise to feel valuable. No longer fear being alone. No longer run from yourself. No longer cling to what has finished its role. No longer rush to judge others. All of these things do not simply make you better. They bring you closer to your true self. And perhaps this is the deepest meaning of healing. Not becoming someone else, but finally being able to live as yourself without feeling the need to ask the whole world for permission. In this video, we have gone through 7 signs that show you have healed more than you think. Not because every wound has disappeared, but because the way you live with those wounds has changed. You no longer react to every pain as you once did. You no longer need to borrow your value from the recognition of others. You no longer fear being alone, no longer run from yourself, no longer cling to what has finished its role, no longer rush to judge others, and no longer force yourself to become someone else just to be accepted. Through the lens of Carl Jung, healing is not about erasing the darkness within a person. Healing is bringing what was once hidden back into the light of consciousness. It is when shadow no longer silently controls your reactions. It is when persona no longer hides your true self. It is when you begin to live closer to self, the deepest and most truthful center within you. Perhaps that journey is not loud. Perhaps no one realizes how much you have changed. But if you are a little calmer, a little more honest, a little less self-abandoning, that is already a sign that something within you is recovering. And remember, healing has never been the journey of searching for a more perfect version of yourself. It is the journey of returning to your true self, little by little, through the very small choices you make each day. If this video touched you, please like, subscribe, and continue walking with us on the journey of exploring the depths of the human mind through the lens of Carl Jung. Because sometimes the most beautiful thing is not how far you have gone, but how you have finally stopped turning away